You said goodbye. You closed the door, or ended the call, or walked away from the table. And then nothing happened. You didn't do anything difficult. You didn't receive bad news. Nobody was unkind. And yet, something about that conversation is still in you. A low-grade heaviness. A kind of static that won't quite clear. You're tired in a way that sleep probably won't fix. You want to be alone, not because you're sad, but because being around anyone right now feels like too much. This is what some people call an emotional hangover. And if you've ever experienced it, and most emotionally sensitive people have regularly, you probably assumed it was something about you, that you were too sensitive, that you needed to toughen up, that other people don't seem to carry conversations around with them like this. But this isn't about being too sensitive. It's about something happening in your nervous system that has a name, a mechanism, and, most importantly, an explanation. When you have a conversation with someone, something happens that goes far beyond the exchange of words. Your nervous system and theirs enter into a continuous, largely unconscious process of mutual influence. Your body is reading their body, the pace of their breathing, the tension in their face, the rhythm of how they speak, the emotional charge beneath what they're saying, and their body is reading yours. This process is called co-regulation. It is one of the most fundamental features of human social interaction, documented extensively in the neuroscience of attachment. The research of Stephen Porges, whose polyvagal theory has reshaped how we understand the social nervous system, describes how human beings are wired to continuously scan for and respond to signals of safety or threat in other people, not through conscious thought, but through the autonomic nervous system beneath awareness. In practical terms, you don't just have a conversation, you share a nervous system state. And some nervous system states are expensive to visit. When someone is anxious, your body begins to prepare for threat. When someone is dysregulated, agitated, overwhelming, emotionally unpredictable, your system works hard to stay steady. When someone requires you to manage their emotional state as well as your own, the metabolic cost is real, even if nothing difficult was said. The conversation is over. The co-regulation is not. There is a second mechanism at work, closely related to co-regulation but distinct. In the 1990s, the social psychologist Elaine Hatfield and her colleagues introduced the concept of emotional contagion, the largely automatic, pre-conscious process by which we absorb the emotional states of people around us, not through empathy, which involves conscious understanding of another's feelings, but through something more primitive, mimicry. Our facial muscles, our posture, our vocal tone subtly mirror the person we're with, and in doing so, we begin to generate the corresponding internal state. You don't decide to catch someone's anxiety or sadness or agitation. It is transmitted through channels so subtle, micro-expressions, vocal prosody, body language, that conscious awareness doesn't even register the transfer. Hatfield's research showed that people vary considerably in their susceptibility to emotional contagion. Those who are more emotionally expressive and more interpersonally attuned, people who are, in other words, more emotionally intelligent, are also more susceptible. The very quality that makes someone a good listener, a perceptive friend, a person others trust with difficult things, also makes them more likely to leave conversations carrying emotions that weren't originally theirs. The emotional hangover often isn't your emotion. It's residue. Not all draining conversations are created equal. There are actually several distinct types, and they exhaust you for different reasons. Once you know which type you're in, you can start to make different choices. The first type is the conversation that requires you to hold someone else's emotional weight for an extended period without reciprocity. They bring the problem. You listen, reflect, contain, support. The exchange is entirely one-directional. What makes this draining isn't the caring, it's the asymmetry. You are doing the emotional labor of two people. The second type is the conversation that contains unspoken tension. What is not said is louder than what is. Something is wrong, or unresolved, or being carefully avoided. Your nervous system detects the gap between the surface and the undercurrent, and works continuously to bridge it, to read it, to manage your responses in light of it. This is exhausting in a very specific way. It is the exhaustion of sustained hypervigilance. The third type is the conversation with someone whose internal state is chronically dysregulated, someone who moves between emotional extremes, who generates unpredictability, who pulls you into their turbulence, even when the topic is mundane. Your nervous system cannot fully relax in their presence, because it has learned that the ground can shift at any moment. And then there is a fourth type, subtler than the rest, and perhaps the most interesting. The conversation where you could not be yourself, where you performed a version of yourself that was acceptable to the other person, where you edited, softened, withheld, where the energy spent maintaining the performance was invisible but real. The existential psychologist Rollo May wrote about the cost of inauthenticity, the quiet depletion that comes from living, even briefly, in a version of yourself that doesn't quite fit. That cost doesn't wait for a convenient moment to present itself. It arrives reliably when the conversation ends. One of the quietly painful aspects of the emotional hangover is watching other people leave the same conversation unaffected. Same table, same words. They're already thinking about what's for dinner. You're still processing something that happened 40 minutes in. This difference is real, and it has a neurobiological basis. The psychologist Elaine Aron, whose research introduced the concept of high sensitivity, found that roughly 15 to 20% of the population has a nervous system that processes sensory and emotional information more deeply than average. Not a disorder, a trait found in similar proportions across many species. The highly sensitive person notices more, processes more, and requires more time to return to baseline after stimulating or emotionally complex experiences. For these people, the emotional hangover is not a sign that something is wrong with them. It is a sign that their nervous system is doing exactly what it was built to do, and that the conversation asked more of it than a less sensitive system would have registered. The fatigue is the price of the depth, and depth in most of the ways that matter is not a liability. Understanding what caused the hangover doesn't automatically dissolve it, but it does change what you reach for. Because what the emotional hangover usually needs is not analysis. It has already had too much of that. What it needs is regulation, returning the nervous system from a state of activation or depletion back to something resembling equilibrium. The body first. Not metaphorically, literally. The research on physiological self-regulation consistently points toward the same cluster of interventions: slow exhalation, which activates the vagal brake and signals the nervous system that the threat has passed; physical movement, which metabolizes the stress hormones that the co-regulation process may have generated; time in an environment that asks nothing of you; no performance, no reading, no responsiveness. The philosopher and poet David Whyte writes about what he calls the conversational nature of reality, the idea that we are continuously shaped by the exchanges we enter into, and that returning to oneself after a significant encounter is not a passive process, but an active one. You have to find your way back. That finding takes time, and it is worth the time it takes. There is also a longer practice, and it is harder. It is learning, gradually, to recognize the conversations that consistently cost more than they give, and to choose, with more intention, how much of yourself you bring into them. Not withdrawal, not protection, just the quiet wisdom of knowing where your energy actually goes and beginning to say so. The emotional hangover is not a character flaw. It is your nervous system telling you with complete honesty what that conversation asked of you. Most people never learn to read that signal. They assume the fatigue is random, or that they are simply bad at being around people, or that they need to be stronger. They push through, or they isolate. And either way, they miss the information. The information is worth having, because once you know what cost you, you can begin, slowly, imperfectly, to spend your energy with more intention. Not to protect yourself from life, but to show up more fully in the parts of it that actually matter. I'm curious about something. Is there a specific type of conversation that reliably leaves you with an emotional hangover? Not a specific person, a type, the one-sided one, the tense under the surface one, the one where you couldn't quite be yourself? Leave it in the comments. I read everything, and I'm genuinely interested in what you notice. If this series is finding you at the right time, subscribing means the next video reaches you too. There's more coming.